Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Chambers. Welcome, everyone. I hope you're doing well, staying safe, no matter where you are in the world. So it's time to grab that special blanket that you love or that beverage that you want. Curl up, get comfortable, because we're going to talk some travel. That's right. In this episode, we're going to be going to the land down under. We're going to talk about traveling to Sydney, Australia, my favorite city of Melbourne, and even going into what I would consider my favorite island in the world. And stick around to the end of the show, because I'm going to give you a couple of ideas where you can take that next birthday trip. I don't know how many of you have ever wanted to travel to Australia, but for me, it was the number one place I wanted to go to since I can remember. I was in elementary school, and we had to do those projects where you learned about traveling to different countries, or it was a cultural day, and we made these passports. And your passports, and you drew and colored and made your own little passport, and they stapled them together, and then you would go to different classrooms, and there would be a different culture or something that you were introduced to as a kid. And we called it like Traveling the World or Cultural Day. And it was really a lot of fun because there would be a different, quote unquote country that you would be in that classroom or whatever setting that we were in at the school, and they would kind of create this vibe of whether you were in China or you were somewhere in the States or in Mexico or Canada. But one of them was Australia, and it was the one that I was really most excited about. And I couldn't decide whether I was more excited about the animals in Australia versus going to the country itself, because I'm a huge animal lover. And I think that's the reason some of my trips that I want to take, some of my bucket list trips are centered around animals, like going on an African safari, or going up to Churchill, Canada to witness the polar bears, or going to the Galapagos and scuba diving. And I mean, it's kind of crazy to kind of think like that. But to me, I love it. I mean, I feel animals are just as much a part of the culture and the place of where you are in the world as the people and the food and the environment. So I think it all goes hand in hand, but I'm just an animal lover, so sometimes that takes precedent. And Australia really hit home with me because I loved kangaroos, I loved koalas. I was obsessed for a little while, and I was the place I wanted to go to most. And just on a side note, we'll talk a little bit more about this in the podcast, but when you talk about certain things in Australia there and you don't say it correctly, you will be corrected. So I'll give you a couple hints. I personally found out a few on my own, and I never knew this, and I should have, but most of us think of koalas, and then we think of koala bear. But koalas aren't bears. They're marsupials. So it's koala. And I remember I was actually down there, and we saw some, and I go, what an adorable koala bear. And a woman next to me turned over and said, "That is not a koala bear, that is a koala." And I go, oh, okay. And, whether she was from Australia or not, she had an Australian accent, so I can only assume that. But from then on out, I was like, I got to make sure I get all this right. And that kind of goes hand in hand. I've talked about this on podcasts in the past. When you're going somewhere, it's always great to look into traditions, pronunciations, learn a little bit about where you're going. I mean, as much fun as it is to be spontaneous and jump right into that, you always want to know a little bit about something when you're going. And if you think you do, you probably don't know as much as you could. And that's a fun thing about traveling. I don't think that traveling has to be a research paper. I think the adventure itself is the research. But again, there are things that you might want to look at. That wasn't one that I was terribly upset about, but it was nice to kind of be corrected. I don't want to walk around saying things that are not true or not correct. So anyway, Australia was one of my favorite places, and I could not wait to go there. It wasn't until I graduated from college when I got a chance to go to Australia, and I took some graduation money and things that I had gotten and saved up for, and instead of going, right into job interviews or grad school or anything like that, my roommate and I decided that we were going to go backpack through Australia. It was, the number one thing that I wanted to do. I wanted to go to Australia, and this is what I wanted to go do. And so we went and backpacked, 5 weeks or so through Australia. And the trip took about a year of planning. This was one of those trips that you have to really know where you want to go and research when going to Australia. Because today we're going to talk about a couple different places and some of my favorite places in Australia. But let me tell you, the country is big. It is enormous, and you really don't even think about it, from the States, in my opinion, because you're coming so far away to get over there. It just doesn't really compute how large the country actually is. You're just like, oh, I could just go travel to Australia, and you could go anywhere. Well, anywhere takes a lot of different flights. I mean, it's like being here in the U.S. People can come into the U.S. and, you fly into Los Angeles, or if you're coming from the other coast, you go into New York, and you're like, oh, well, I'll go to Yellowstone, and I'll go to Chicago, and all these places. And you think about it, and it's a lot of extra traveling. You have to take trains and other flights and long car drives sometimes, and it's the same thing with Australia. It's such a big country, but it is a wonderful country. It is very diverse. It's got some incredible landscape, people. I loved every minute of it. And we spent a year planning a trip, and it started out with 8 of us. Eight people were on this trip, and it ended up, by the time the trip came, it ended up being 2. So it is a trip that you really want to make sure whoever's going is really locked into that. Now, we had several different versions of the trip. We had a big map of Australia that we put out, and we drew, like a line with put pins in places we wanted to go, and then marked them, and then had string and yarn, connecting our routes and things like that. We decided that we were going to backpack, and our original plan with a larger group was to rent a camper van and kind of do it that way. But by the time it got closer to the trip, we had whittled down to not many people, so we all decided that we were just going to backpack, and we would use the train systems and all the public transit, which I loved. And, that was just the way that we would do it. So everyone would buy their own flight, and we wouldn't have to worry about extra costs for gas and things like that. So there's plenty of ways to visit Australia. And we did a backpackers version. Now, I would love to go back again and do it in a different way. But if you are a backpacker or you love that adventure lifestyle, Australia is the perfect place for it. It really is. We flew from Houston to LAX, and then from LAX we caught the overnight on Qantas and got a flight directly into Sydney. And that, to me, was the best way to do it. If you're coming from, other cities, most of the time you're going to go through LAX. I know there are other flights in other major cities that you can go to from Australia. LAX is really the bigger hub. So if you're looking for, for a good hub to go out of, LAX is what I would recommend. Qantas is a wonderful airline. I've never flown them other than that one time, or I guess the 2 or 3 different times that we had flights on this trip. But it was the only time I had ever flown on Qantas, and I had a wonderful experience. It was really great. The service was wonderful. I didn't have any complaints. I really didn't. And I know that, on a long flight, sometimes you just want to get there or you're in your own world, and sometimes it's hard to complain, but it really was a wonderful and easy flight, and I was comfortable the entire time. The staff was great. Granted, every flight is hit or miss sometimes depending on who you're with, but I would entirely recommend them flying again. So we get into Sydney, and of course it's an overnight flight, and we get in there, and it's morning time. So we're a little exhausted, but the one thing that I want to recommend if you're a doer on vacation like me, when you land in a city, you're going to want to get out and do stuff right away, in my opinion, if you have the time, and then get to bed early that evening. That way, you're refreshed and ready to go the very next day, and you feel like you didn't waste an entire day plus travel. Because that can be sometimes when you're on a time frame. And for us, we were wanting to maximize our time while we were there, enjoy it, but we wanted to maximize the time that we had. And so when we landed at like 6:30 or 7 in the morning, we immediately went and found, we were staying at a hostel at the time, and so we found our hostel, we put our bags down, and then we went right out and tried to find and walk in and explore the things that Sydney had to offer. And then, of course, we were in bed by probably about 6 or 6:30 that night, and we were exhausted, of course, and we slept so well. And we were up the next day, relatively a good time, and it was a good formula. I really recommend it for those that are doers. If you're one that gets off a plane, you got to relax. Maybe try a little cat nap and then go do some stuff. But it's really hard when you have that time frame, where you're only in a place like Australia, which takes a lot to get to for some people, to lose that time. So I really recommend that. Now, the other thing about being down there is that you're going to want to do a lot of big things, and I'm going to hit on a couple. And, of course, you're going to be like, oh, well, of course, Brian, duh, I'm going to go see that. But there are some things that I will recommend that you may not think that are, on your to-do list, and you may find it interesting. And the number one thing when you get there, once you check into your hotel, look around, obviously do your research and know what's kind of around your hotel, but spend the day really exploring the city. And Sydney is a huge city. It's got so much. There's more than just the harbor. Okay, now I will say that. There's some wonderful things in the harbor, and you're going to want to go down there. It's going to be fabulous. Trust me, you're definitely going to want to do that. And you'll go down to the Circular Quay, and it's pronounced Key. That's right, I said that. There was another thing I talked about with koalas. It's not K. Even though it looks like K, it's the Circular Quay. And that's where you can get the harbor boats out. And if it is absolutely worth it to take a trip around the harbor, just especially if the weather is nice, you're going to want to do that. You're going to it's really going to, for me, that was the first thing that we ended up doing because it made us and helped us feel like we were really in Australia. And it was really a neat experience because you go under the bridge, you see the opera house, and you go all the way around the harbor, and you kind of get an idea and see other areas of the city that even if you're not staying there. So a harbor cruise is something that I really recommend. They're not really, really long. It's not like a full day event. So you can do it and really enjoy it. For the adventurers out there, you can always walk the bridge, which I didn't personally do. So for that heart attack, it was not something that I was going to do because across that harbor with all that wind and going up there, that's for the thrill seekers in you. I typically am a yes man when it comes to that, but for this particular one, I was a little more reserved. But people that have done it have really enjoyed it, and I've heard it is the best view in all of Sydney. You're also, if you're into, if you're a very nautical person, the Maritime Museum was incredibly fascinating. We spent time there. For us, it was really interesting, and the history of that Australia has is a history that most of us aren't really familiar with. So for me, being a history buff and getting to go to their Maritime Museum, was just a thrill. I highly recommend that. We also wanted to, and this was the child in me, I love Nemo, and who doesn't, right? So we went to the aquarium. We went to the Sydney Aquarium thinking that we might be able to see some things that you may not be able to see at other aquariums, but there are so many fantastic world-renowned aquariums, not just in Sydney, but in the U.S. and Europe and all these other places. And so, I don't necessarily recommend it. We were a little younger, and so we thought it was kind of fun. It was a very neat experience. If you have little ones with you, it's a great experience. But there's so much outdoors to do if the weather's nice that I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. But it is a wonderful time, and we did really enjoy our time there. The other thing that I'm going to say is you can't go to Sydney and not go to Bondi Beach. That's right. You got to go to Bondi Beach. It's really worth it. Even if it's cold, if you're there in wintertime, it's still worth going to the beach. My favorite time, and of course this is the time that I went, but we looked at all different times to go, and a lot of people go during Christmas for the States, right? Because it's the summertime in Australia. Well, we decided that we were going to go in our summer because that was easier for us, and so we went at the beginning of our summer. So end of May and through June, we were in Australia, and that kind of bled into their winter. But it was like fall winter, and so the weather, the end of May, June, early June, was absolutely gorgeous. It was wonderful. Everything we wanted to do was outside. Now, it wasn't extremely hot, so getting in the water wasn't exactly on our to-do list, but the weather itself for exploring the city and just being everywhere was wonderful. They have their own needle, in the center of the city that you can go up to. It's an incredible city. It's a bustling city, so it's a major metropolitan city, and the food is phenomenal. Now, again, I said we were staying in hostels. There are plenty of hotels. A couple of hotels that if you're looking for the more the up and up or the more luxurious style, I'm just going to throw this one out, and if I go back, I would want to stay there too. Park Hyatt Sydney, and that is pretty much the best view, with a hotel with the best view in all of Sydney. It's got top views of the harbor. You're going to have first class all the way. It's highly rated. It is going to run you anywhere between $300 to $400 a night. So you're going to want to make sure that if you are, wanting to spend that much for the hotel. There are others that you can stay at, but on a more budget-friendly, if you're there that you want to do a step up from a hostel, you're not a backpacker or, in your early 20s or an adventure seeker, you can go and stay at the Vibe Hotel. It's really a wonderful experience. You can get figs from the trees that they use like that right there on property that you'll be having in the morning. It's kind of a little boutique hotel that's wonderful. It's in the middle, so it's halfway between all the hustle and bustle and just far enough away. So you're kind of in a really central spot as far as location, and it's very beautiful and wonderful. And those are two options that I would recommend. But Sydney is always a place to stay. And you can't leave Sydney without going to the Blue Mountains. And the Blue Mountains is called the Blue Mountains because when you go out there and you look, the gaze almost makes them look as if they are painted blue. And it is absolutely gorgeous. It's a wonderful hike. It's about 45 minutes or so outside the city, so you're going to want to make sure that you plan for that ahead of time. So there you go. Those are some recommendations. I mean, we're going to start this Land Down Under trip in Sydney, but don't worry. When we come back, we're going to talk about my favorite city in all of Australia, going down to Melbourne. You're not going to want to miss it, so stay with us.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us. We just finished talking about traveling to Sydney, Australia. That's right. We're going to stay in Aussie land and talk about my favorite city, Melbourne. That's right. Most of you, when you look at Melbourne, you think about, when you see it, the way it's pronounced, it sounds like Melbourne, which is like many of us actually pronounce it. But I was told that it is Melbourne, or at least locals, when they say Melbourne, or in Melbourne, as I used to pronounce it, they said that locals will call it Melbourne. So Melbourne became a favorite city of mine traveling to Australia. And for many of those that are, if you're just joining the podcast, in my previous segment, I was talking about traveling to Australia, and we had made a backpackers trip out of this. So we had planned to be down there for 4 to 5 weeks at least. It was an incredible experience. Highly, highly recommend it. And it's really easy to do because, starting in Sydney was a good launching point. And we got the rail pass, the Australia rail pass, where we paid a set amount of money, where then we could basically book trips on trains, as many as we want, as many economy classes or whatever level we paid for, and we paid for the economy class, that you could within a certain time frame before it expired, of course, on a certain railway. So on the Australian rail, we bought this pass, and so anytime that we wanted to just travel somewhere or go somewhere, we would look to see if the train actually went that direction or we could get there, and then we would just book it, so without having to spend a lot of extra money. So if you're a budget-cautious person, this could be a very good plan for you. It doesn't have to be, something where you have to book it in a certain amount of time, but if it's good for up to 3 months. Now, that could have changed since I have been there last, so I would make sure that you go on and you check all the public transportation and railway sites before you book any of this. But when we were there, it was good for 3 months when we paid for it. And at the time, it wasn't super, super expensive, but we got a pretty good deal on it. But it was great for us, and we would use it as overnights. Now, I will tell you this. I'm not traveling overnight on a train unless I am getting a sleeper car at this point in my life. But if you're an adventurer or you are okay with that uncomfortable situation, maybe for one day, I would be okay with that, but I wouldn't do an entire trip like that. But when you're young, hey, you can do it, sleeping on the ground, whatever, uncomfortable situations. But it worked for us. So we took a train to Melbourne, and it was basically like taking a flight almost. You're going 8 or 9 hours on a train. So we did the overnight to get down there, and I wasn't really quite sure what we were going to experience when we got there. And let me tell you, this city is just a cultural hub like I've never seen. It was incredible. The artwork alone around the city was phenomenal, and to me, just so breathtaking. And I think that was what originally made me fall in love with Melbourne so much. The other reason was, now we didn't stay directly in the middle of the city. Again, we were staying in hostels, and you can find great hotels. It's a major city. You're not gonna show up and be like, where should we stay? There's so many options that we could spend multiple days on a podcast going through the options of where to stay. But we ended up staying at a hostel, and it was very interesting because we ran into more people from around the world in this city than we had the entire trip that we were there. And usually when you kind of stay in a backpacker's haven, you run into so many different people. It's incredible. And we did. And throughout our entire trip, we were always running into groups of people that were traveling and doing something similar to us. But this particular city of Melbourne was so diverse that we were running into, people from Scotland and, Perth and other parts of the States and Asia. And I think there was someone from South Africa. It was just incredible, just the difference and diversity of people that we got to meet on this trip. And so I loved it. And we ended up in a little place that was about a 30-minute subway or rail ride outside of downtown. And that was great for us because we weren't in the middle of everything real crazy, and we had planned to stay there a few extra days longer, so it kind of made it a lot more casual. So we really felt a lot more local going and staying there, and it was really wonderful. But the city itself is a cultural hub. You're going to see a lot more of this artwork. It's a lot more contemporary with things, and with the river that runs through it, with the crew boats that go by in the morning, it is really a unique experience. One of my favorite things that we went was to the Victorian Market. And I really recommend this if you go down there. Now, it's not open every day. It's only open on certain days. So you have to make sure that you check which day that you're going down there. I believe it was Tuesdays and Thursdays when we were there. Their schedule sometimes can shift. But it is a really wonderful market because if you are a foodie like me, and the crazy thing was I wasn't that much of a foodie back then. At that point I was like, well, we got to do and experience all these things, and I love to eat, but I wasn't really focused on that. Now I am, and I would probably enjoy this market even more because every type of meat and these small vendors and all these places is just a wide open space. And to be honest, it really is a wonderful shopping experience, to say the least, even for backpackers, because we were able to get fruits and things that we would, pack in our bags and take with us, and even you can haggle a little bit with some of the vendors. And we ended up with a really wonderful lunch that we ate. I just really recommend it. There's a lot of history and things that you can go do, but that was, for me, the artwork and everything else was really neat. My second favorite thing that outside of the people and walking through the city and the market was going to an Aussie rules footy game, to go into a footy game. And Australian rules football is not the typical football game that you're going to go to, right? So when we think football in America, we think of, the NFL. When you think of football in Europe, you think of soccer. And, when you think of rugby, you think of a mixture of both, right? But Australian rules is similar to rugby, but it's its own game, pretty much. It's played with 18 players. The field is humongous. Not saying that soccer fields and other fields are not big, but all those fields are big, but there's 18 people, and it was crazy because they have this dome in the city called the Telstra Dome. It was where all their club teams come in there and play, and we were rooting for the team, that section we were in, because we had no loyalty to anybody, so we were rooting for the Geelong Wildcats was the team that we were rooting for, because that was the section we were in, and it's a mixture of rugby, of a version of rugby. And I almost want to say it was more of like a version of rugby and basketball. If you could bounce the ball and tackle somebody in basketball and then run with it and kick it, it would be Australian rugby. And I was trying to follow the rules, but the atmosphere itself was what took me in, and just how many people loved it. And it was a really neat experience. It's almost similar to most of you have never been to a cricket game, and I've only been to one in my entire life, and it wasn't even in the UK. It was a cricket game that was being played in the States, and I had no idea what was going on. I tried to follow, but I just was enjoying being there, and that was kind of how it was. And we were rooting, and of course you could tell when someone scored and things like that. But it is really an experience to go. Tickets are not very expensive. You can usually find them day of because the stadium is so big. It's one thing that everyone really gets into. Rugby is huge in Australia anyway, so we were also down there during the Rugby World Cup, and that's a whole different thing that I'd have to go into an entire different podcast on. But they play Aussie rules football, and it is very big down there, so I highly, highly recommend to check that out. The other thing that is not particularly, it's not in the city of Melbourne, but you're going to want to do this trip when you go to Melbourne, and that is to go and take a trip to the Great Ocean Road and see the 12 Apostles. So many of you guys may have seen pictures that are of these large stones. There's 12 of these stones in really neat rock formations off the southern coast of Australia, and they're called the 12 Apostles. And you can take a day trip down there. It's going to be an all-day trip that you're going to want to book. You can do it if you rent your own car. You can travel down there and do it that way, but I personally recommend going with a tour group because they'll make specific stops that if you don't know about, that they will specifically know, and the knowledge and wealth that kind of comes with it to me is worth the price of that. And so we ended up doing a tour. We didn't have a car, but we didn't want to rent our own, so we did a tour, and it's called the Great Ocean Road because they carved this road, or made this road, paved this road during the war to make room for things and troops and things that were, and machines and things that were going through. So some of the road is actually carved through massive trees and sides of the mountains. So there's like tunnels and things like that, and it's really unique. And you get to go down there, and you get to go to one of the most, and for those of you I'm speaking to in the 80s people at this point, there's a beach that's mentioned in a movie that's in Australia, and it's from Point Break, the movie with Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze, surfing movie. If you know it, awesome. If not, you should check it out. But it's called Bells Beach, Australia, and they make a reference in the movie how it's like the best beach in the world with the biggest waves and things like that. Well, that beach actually exists. It's down on the Great Ocean Road in Australia, and it's really called Bells Beach, Australia. It's not like it was in the movie. Obviously, they filmed that somewhere else. But you can go there, but you can't really get down there. But it was, again, cold and chilly, so we weren't going to go in the water. And when I say cold, there are penguins that were on these beaches. So if that gives you guys any ideas what the temperatures in southern Australia can get to in the winter times, they can get chilly. But you travel, through a lot of the smaller cities along down there. Some of them, Billabong, you may have heard of. Oh, yeah, they're a pretty big brand when it comes to surfing and things like that. So this is that area where surfing is huge, and some of these cities are big distributors of that, and this tour is really neat. You get to go down to the 12 Apostles, and you get to get out. There's a viewing point. It's a wonderfully gorgeous scene that you're going to see. And one recommendation that I don't even know if I could get my wife to do this if we went down there now, but my friend and I actually did a helicopter ride over the 12 Apostles, and I really recommend that. It's a little bit pricey, but, this coming from a college graduate that was backpacking, we were able to afford it. So I really recommend that because it gives you these aerial views of the entire landscape along the coastline, and you can really see it, and it's really beautiful how the water changes colors when it gets closer to the stones and the shore, and when it gets really deep. And it's really a neat experience if you've never been in a helicopter. That was my first helicopter ride, so I thought it was a bit of a extra excitement factor that I got to do that. And, of course, then there you go to the infamous London Bridge that looks like London's Bridge. And, of course, everyone in the tour group says, London Bridge is falling down, and we all had kind of a laugh at it. But I have a feeling that every tour group does that. But the Great Ocean Road and the 12 Apostles, definitely a must-to-do list. It's an all-day trip. You're going to want to do it. There's going to be a chance to see some Aboriginal artwork and things like that as well along the way. So look into booking that. You can look at different tour groups, but just make sure you check a reputable one for that, because they will come and pick you up from your hotel, or you on certain groups they did for us, or you can choose one that you can meet at a certain spot. So there you go. Artistic City, kind of more my jam. Melbourne, Australia, highly, highly recommend it. It is my favorite in all of Australia. If I was going to retire and I was moving to Australia, Melbourne would be my number one choice. So there you go. All right, well, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about possibly my favorite island in all of the world, and it happens to be off the coast of Australia, so you're not going to want to miss it.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Just talking about traveling to the great city of Melbourne, Australia. And make sure you guys hang around to the end of the show, because you're not going to want to miss a couple of recommendations if you are planning for a birthday trip for yourself or a friend. I got a couple of places that you might want to consider when planning that trip. But we're going to jump right into my favorite island in the entire world. Yes, it is off the coast of Australia. It is called Fraser Island. That's right. Fraser, not Frasier, as in the TV show, which is a great TV show and I love. But Fraser Island is, there's one way to get there, and you got to get up through, it's in Hervey Bay. So the best way that I recommend when you're going, if you're planning this trip, because it has to be a separate trip that you really have extra time to do. We traveled to Brisbane, and then you travel up, and it's a little bit of a quick ride up to Hervey Bay where you get on a boat, and then that takes you out to Fraser Island. So if you have the time, this is what I would consider a must-do when visiting Australia. And it's Australia. It's Queensland. It's off the Queensland coast, and it's the world's largest sand island. That's right. A sand island. This island was formed from 3 volcanic rocks, and they actually take you to that point, to the where they show you where the island was formed. And there's really some incredible things about this island specifically, and I want to get into these. There's a lot of people say, well, why is this your favorite island in the world? Because, they question me because Fraser Island is also known as the #1 most dangerous beach in the world, has the most dangerous beach in the world. And so when people hear that and they say, well, why is that your favorite island? Because when they think of island, they think of, basking in the sun and traveling and getting to be in the water. And it has so many other things on the island itself to do that just makes the beauty and even the danger of it a lot more appealing to me. And jumping back real quick, the #1 most dangerous beach in the world at Fraser Island, the reason that it is considered that is because it's known for great whites to hang off the coast. That's right. there are several people in the coast, off the Australian coast, who hunt great whites. And I know what people are thinking, like, oh, no, we don't want to do that, right? But there is a reason that we found out, because there was a museum, a guy who hunted a great white. We traveled and found his little museum when we were back on land, on the mainland, and he actually figured out a way to refrigerate or preserve with its skin on a great white, like in a viewing tank, I guess you would say. But it was like a cold freezer fridge that would preserve the shark. And he used to have the world record for the largest great white caught. And the reason that he actually was someone to hunt great whites was not strictly for sport, because he thought that they were, and they have theories that they are beaching whales. So they are attacking or coming at whales and forcing them along the coast, and it basically is causing them to end up on high tide or low tide, get stuck on the beaches and die. And they have these theories because they see the marks and things on the whales. And so they try to regulate the population of the great whites in the area, because that track specifically around the Great Barrier Reef and that area has a track known for whale migrations. So that's a little bit of history, or a little bit of info for you guys there. But it is known as one of the most dangerous beaches in the world, this little island. And it's not a very large island, but it is. It's the largest sand island in the world. And what makes that really interesting is that all the water and lakes on the island itself are fresh water. And this is really unique because the sand is actually filtering things in all the water. So all the lakes, and when I say lakes, we're not talking about a pond or a little stream. We're talking about major, like a large lake that you can get into. The sand is incredibly soft. It's bigger than some of the lakes that I've actually been at to swim in, but it's incredible. And we were sitting on this lake, or on this beach, and enjoying the lake, and the sand was so soft. And about 10 feet away, a dingo came up and just got a drink of water just next to us. Just, we're sitting there, and my friend and I were just looking and in amazement, just watching this dingo just drink this water as it's an everyday occurrence, right? Dingoes and people, we just coexist. He just comes up, gets the water. He, didn't really stop. He turned, saw us, but then just kept going, just as if it was, yeah, I'm doing this, see ya. And it was really great. It was very surreal for us to sit there and see a wild dingo just do this. And they are very populated. There's a large population of dingoes on Fraser Island, and it's very common to see them. So if you travel to Fraser Island, you are going to be met with an abundance of wildlife, the kookaburra birds, the dingoes, and one that didn't make me feel entirely comfortable was that a large portion of the world's most poisonous snakes are actually inhabited on Fraser Island. At least that's what our guide told us. So that didn't make me feel 100% fantastic, especially as we hiked through a lot of the island. But if you stick to the paths and things that with your guide on the island, you will be fine. And the vegetation is really interesting because you have areas on the island that feel almost rainforest-esque, or like a cool rainforest. And then after all this vegetation and green and water, you come to this section of the island, and it looks like you're in the middle of the desert. And we had to hike across this to get to the coastline. And literally, it looked like we just came out of the forest, and now we are in the Sahara Desert, and we see nothing but sand for a couple miles. And so we're just walking across these big, huge sand dunes and things, and up, and we finally get to the coast, and it's just a gorgeous scene. And you can get up on these rocks and see stingrays and things in the water. It was wonderful. There were so many different viewpoints out there, but the lakes being fresh water, the hiking and the scenery was just phenomenal. And there's even a trail that you can take that you can walk from the ocean going up, because there's a little runoff of the water from the island that goes into the ocean. You can actually walk up that to get back up into some of the other areas. And we ended up doing that as well. So it is a great outdoor experience. There's certain parts of the island that you can only get to by large tundras, and they have these tundras, but that if you go with a tour group. But not only can you choose the option with a tour group, but you can actually go and camp and do things yourself. There was a lot of locals and other backpackers that were experienced more in the area or knew about the island more than we did when we went. But they would rent, and they would have these Jeeps, and they would all pack in, and they were traveling across. And you have to have a 4x4 because you are driving on sand. There's very, very few roads, and I think the only road that I remember being on was the road from right after we got off the dock from the boat. There was a road, and then there's a lodge with cabins and like it's kind of a section, and there's like one or two roads that go there. But to get anywhere else on the island, you have to have a 4x4 because you are traveling by sand or off-road, and so it's a really fun experience. Now, those large tundras, I'm not gonna lie, they are not what you would call the most luxurious ride as far as comfort goes. But they are not uncomfortable by any means. You're going to have bumps and things like that, but, I mean, you're going over all these landscapes and through sand and literally driving on the beach. I mean, there's even people – we even saw a plane land on the beach. So there's no roads there. There's no roads. So you have to ferry over, and a lot of people will do it on their own. It's kind of a really neat camping trip, and we saw people all over the place, and we saw many – spots where they recommend you not drive unless you have a certain size Tundra or car. And we saw that as well. We witnessed plenty of people stuck in sand or having to get help from other people and other Jeeps going out or through water sections because they decided to drive through and they just couldn't make it. These Tundras that we were in, the wheels were probably like a monster truck size wheel almost, it felt like. So you're climbing up into this. So you won't get stuck in one of these. So I recommend going with a tour group. Plus, you get to stay in a really nice cabin. And there's if you go and you book, you have like your own room with whoever you're with, but then there's a communal area. And so the group that you end up touring with, you guys get to kind of hang out, and it's a really neat bonding experience. In fact, we met these great guys from Ireland and this couple from Japan. And they were just fantastic. We had such a blast with them, and it was a ton of fun. And our tour guide was fantastic. He was so knowledgeable. So Fraser Island is definitely something that you should check out. It's got the wildlife, it's got the off-road, and that thrill-seeking. And it also does have a little bit of sense of relaxing because you do have a lot of hiking and walking and things, but there's beautiful views. You get to really hang out along the coast, and there's some water spots right there on the coast with some pools where you can kind of dip in and relax. It's just a really neat experience. And, to say that you were on one of the most dangerous beaches in the world is kind of neat, and the world's largest sand island. I mean, right there. You're not going to find that. You're not going to find that anywhere. And like I said, the beaches that you can, or the lakes that you can swim at, I talked about the lakes. The biggest one was Lake Wabi, and the other one was Lake McKenzie. And there are actually fish in these lakes. And the water was incredible. It's all fresh water, so you're not swimming in salt water. So you think about that. The ecosystem that is running through and the wildlife is just incredible. So I highly recommend this. Fraser Island, don't miss it. Remember, you got to go up to Brisbane and then catch a trip, which is only about, I guess it was about 30 to 45 minutes to Hervey Bay from Brisbane. And that's north. So you're heading north up the Gold Coast and everything. So it's a little bit of a trek, but if you happen to be passing through Brisbane, I highly, highly recommend this. I mean, I can't even say that enough. I'm just going to say it till I'm blue in the face. Fraser Island. You guys are not going to want to miss it. All right, so that is a taste of a little bit of Australia, guys. You cannot put a price on going to Australia, although everyone will. But I would pay it again in a heartbeat. it is worth every cent to go over. I mean, other experiences that you can have down there, they have a lot of sanctuaries for koalas and kangaroos and emus that you can go to. It's really a wonderful experience culturally. The Aboriginal culture down there is wonderful. And you don't realize the history of how deep things run there in Australia, because almost every major world war has touched some part of Australia in itself. And so there's a lot of history down there. And if you're a history buff, this would interest you a lot. We enjoyed our time down there tremendously. There's other cities and places to go to. Now, of course, everyone likes to put on that bucket list going up to Cairns and Darwin and places like that. You know, that is going to be a podcast for another day because, like I said at the beginning, the continent is so big, is such a large country that there's so much to see. You can't do it in one trip unless you have like over a month or so to do it. It's just one that you're going to want to go back to, and it's worth it too, because you can get a really quick quick plane ride down to Tasmania. It's about a 3-hour trip to New Zealand. You know, you take the longest train ride in the world from Sydney to Perth. There's a lot of really cool pluses to it. You have the tropics, you have the coast, you have the mountains, you have the desert, you have history, culture. I mean, it's just wonderful. So if you have not considered checking into going to Australia, I highly recommend it. And go on, do your research. It's going to be a trip you're not going to want to forget. All right. Stick around, because when we come back, I'm going to go through a few birthday suggestions if you were considering one for yourself or a friend of where to travel.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back, everyone. We were just talking about one of my favorite islands in the entire world. It's Fraser Island off the coast of Australia, right there north of Hervey Bay in Queensland. You are going to want to check that out. But thanks for sticking around to the end of the podcast. And as promised, I'm going to go through a couple of recommendations for birthday trips. That's right. Why does traveling have to be for vacation? Why does it have to be for a long period of time? It doesn't. You can make a trip anytime you wanted, and travel can be part of your daily life if you wanted it to, or weekly, depending on what kind of time availability you have. But birthday trips are popular. They're very popular. When I always thought of trips, it was for large events or big vacations, because I grew up in a large family, and so we always had planned trips. And so you would have this time that was when vacation was, that's when we're going on a trip. Or you would have this trip that you'd spend a lot of time planning. And sometimes some of the best trips are done that way, where you spend that extra time researching or planning it. But a spontaneous trip can be just as fun. And my wife has done this to me. We've ended up doing long weekends, or deciding that, we have to do something. We have to go to a conference, and so let's make a trip out of this. There's lots of different ways, but one that's becoming very popular is birthday trips. It's the older we get, the more we tend to want to say, where do I need to go for my birthday? Because it's just not as exciting anymore to do just a cake or hang at home, at least maybe not to some people. I enjoy the low-key birthday. But am I going to be upset if we decide to travel somewhere? Absolutely not. In fact, one of my favorite birthday trips was a trip to Chicago that my wife surprised me with. We had a wonderful birthday weekend. And, you know, that's just one of many that you can take. And I'm going to go through a couple that I would recommend for here in the States. So if you're listening outside of the United States, you may not be able to make these over a weekend, but that doesn't mean that you can't make them a birthday getaway. All right. And I've talked about this on one of my other podcasts, and I'm really going to throw it out again. It is Napa Valley. So Napa Valley is become, to me, eye-opening to go and really see it, because you never understood it, because people say go to Napa. Even if you're not a wine drinker, you'll appreciate it. You'll enjoy it. The weather, we went in March, but even if it's hot or it's cold, I've never heard of anyone that's gone to Napa and not had a good time. And think about it. What do we do, especially as we get older with birthdays? A lot of times it's celebration. We're going to have some wine. We're going to drink. We're going to have cake. It's a party. So why not do it in style over several different vineyards? So checking out Napa Valley is what I would recommend if you are into that really social, relaxing scene. You can do things, picnic and have, that birthday celebration and cake, or do the massage thing or the mud bath in Calistoga, relax and then go to a nice dinner and hang out. If you're staying at one of there's a place we stayed up called Solage, and they had a really gorgeous pool, and we did the spa treatments and things like that. It was a wonderful afternoon, and we really enjoyed it. And after a day of going to vineyards and drinking wine, what better way to relax than a nice mud bath and a pool, right? Followed by a great steak and a dinner and a good night's sleep. Right now, I'm almost wanting to book a trip, right? Birthday or not, to go over there. So Napa's one that I highly recommend. It's become a real popular destination, especially for birthdays. I know it's always been kind of a popular destination for people for anniversary and things like that, because it's really romantic. When you get into some of those hills and the vineyards, it's really great. So Napa's one that I recommend. Another one that I'm going to throw out to you guys, and I'm going to throw this one out, it's Aspen. Now, Aspen is a place that, whether you like snow or you don't like snow, can depend when you want to take that trip. If you're up for the skiing and you want to do a ski weekend and away, it might cost you a little extra, but you're going to have the best time ever going. It is a mixture of wealth and relaxation. You have a gorgeous mountainside setting. It's got amazing spas, high-end restaurants, boutique shopping. I mean, there's really something for everyone. It's just one of those places. I mean, Colorado is a gorgeous state. And Aspen, whether there's snow on the ground or it's green, the mountains are never anything that you would be like, we're here. So I recommend it. Aspen is really great. And if you're looking at a birthday getaway too, going in off-peak time can be a really fun experience, because you get to be there in Aspen, and there's a lot more outdoor activities and things to do without having massive crowds there. So I would consider Aspen as a birthday getaway celebration. And also depending the birthday too, I would probably say that an Aspen trip would be something if you were 30 and up to go to. A lot of people would like to say that if you're 40s and 50s, but I say, why do you have to wait till you get to 40 or 50 to go on a birthday trip to Aspen, even if you are going to spend a little bit of money, right? So I recommend it if you're, over 30 to head to Aspen for a birthday weekend. So a lot of fun. Another one, I tossed and turned with this one, but I am going to throw it out there. Las Vegas is a great birthday recommendation. It's definitely not my number one choice, because I'm not a gambler. But the city itself, Las Vegas, has so much to offer. The incredible shows that you can go to. It has great dining. The people watching itself is fantastic. And for a group to go, it's a really fun experience. There's a lot of things for everyone, and you can be on one schedule or you can be on separate schedules. And the other thing is, coming from almost anywhere in the States, it's not a really expensive trip as far as flights go to get to Vegas. So, you have the gambling, then you have the clubbing. So if you're not if someone in your group is not into the clubbing, or, you don't know where to go for a birthday celebration, there are all kinds of, restaurants that you can choose, or dance clubs you can go to, live concerts going on, shows, events. I mean, it's really kind of a neat experience that you can do a birthday for anyone going to Vegas, as long as you're 21 and over. It's I know that everyone thinks about it as the 21st birthday place to go, but personally, I think it's kind of an every birthday type of year that you can go to Vegas. I don't think there's just one year you can limit yourself. I really enjoy the shows going there, and you never know what kind of celebrities you're going to run into. That's kind of the other neat thing. I bumped into Frank Thomas, who's a Major League Baseball player, in the airport, and Sir Patrick Stewart actually happened to be eating at the restaurant that we were at, like at the table, and it was really, really hard for me to not like walk over and want to hug him, especially when my chair was facing him and I had to sit my whole meal eating looking at Sir Patrick Stewart. So, but you never know who you're going to run into in Vegas. So Vegas, definitely a good birthday recommendation. Another one I'm going to throw it out there is Nashville. Nashville, and I've talked about Nashville on a podcast before. Fantastic city, wonderful Southern cooking, and if you are a music lover, or you have someone, or this is someone's birthday that loves live music, I'm going to say bump Nashville up there, or throw that out there, because it is a great trip and to go to, or to go on for a birthday, especially with a group, because there's so many different venues. The city itself is very unique, as well as it's not very large. So it's not like you're going to run into a crazy amount of people in Nashville. But every musician that you walk into in a bar or wherever you're at is going to sound like they are a studio-grade musician. There's culture, there's drinks, there's historical things to do. It's a really gorgeous city. It's got major universities, and you can catch a show, the Opry. There's a lot to do in Nashville. I really recommend it. So if you're getting away or looking for a quick birthday getaway, Nashville is definitely on my list. I think you should put it on yours. Moving right along, another one that I'm going to throw out there, and I know this is not going to be necessarily on everyone's top list, but Sedona, Arizona, that's right. So Sedona is it's Red Rock country. So if you're not familiar with it, if you go into Phoenix, you're going to drive about an hour, maybe 2 hours north, and it is stunning beyond belief. That's all I can say. The Red Rock area is very outdoorsy, so if you're not really an outdoors type of person, then this might not be the birthday trip that you would want to take or plan for somebody else. I think it can be planned for anyone personally, because they do have spas and places that are in town, but there's also the gorgeous mountains have so many outdoor trails, whether you're biking, whether you're hiking, whatever you're doing, they have a ton of outdoor activities that you can do. Horseback riding, if that's your jam. And great wine, actually, in the area. Actually, some wonderful vineyards that you can travel to. So you don't actually have to travel all the way to Napa to get wines. There's another region that you can do, and that's right there in the Red Rock country in Sedona. So put that one on your list. You're not going to want to miss that. Okay, so I'm getting down to the bottom here, but another one that I'm going to throw out there, okay, and this is kind of obvious, is New Orleans. And the reason that I put up New Orleans, now New Orleans is a wonderful city. As a food city, New Orleans is fantastic. New Orleans has so much to offer. And if you've never been, it's a lot of fun. A lot of people I know either like to go, again, kind of for that 21st birthday, or if you're doing a bachelorette or bachelor party, tends to be where a lot of people go to New Orleans. But I think a birthday weekend is a lot more fun. One, your group is probably not going to be quite as large. You're not having to deal with as much. It's really just getting together. It's easier to plan. there's not going to be a place that you're going to go in New Orleans with the food that's going to be bad. Stop by that gumbo shop, go by Cafe Du Monde, get those beignets. It's wonderful. Go to, Frenchman Street and catch some great jazz. You're going to have a good time. I personally recommend staying in the Garden District if you're looking for a little bit more of the quieter side, but with walking distance to the French Quarter. So the Garden District is definitely an area that I would recommend staying in. But New Orleans, that is a birthday trip for anything. It's also, you can get a train down there too. Even from Texas, if anyone here in Houston that listens to this podcast that is here in Houston, you can catch a train to New Orleans instead of having to make that drive. So if you don't want to make that dreaded 5-hour drive, then you don't have to worry about it. But if you're coming from out of state and other places, it's definitely something that you're going to want to, or a city that you're going to want to visit. And the final one that I am going to throw up, is it's going to be New York City. That's right. I know a lot of people are like, well, everyone goes to New York. I look for any reason to go to New York. And if you tell me, hey, let's do a birthday weekend in New York, I'm like, absolutely, let's do it. I'm a Broadway fan. I'm a musical theater geek. I'm going to go and see shows. I'm going to have a good time, a city that never sleeps. I mean, if you're in the summertime, you have concerts in the park, in Central Park. There's just so many things to do, and it's just endless possibilities. And New York is just fun. And now you can go walk across the Brooklyn Bridge. For those of you that are not familiar with the areas, you can go stay in Brooklyn, then go across the bridge and go into the city. There's just so many things to do. And who wouldn't want to go to New York City, have a good time with some friends, and maybe catch a Broadway show? World-class entertainment right there. Every type of food you can think of and imaginable, and great people. You don't have to be a tourist with these trips either. If you don't want to go to the Statue of Liberty, don't go to the Statue of Liberty, But I recommend it if you are planning a trip and you haven't been somewhere, to experience it, even if it's a birthday weekend. But of course, you want to make sure that you tailor it to the birthday boy or girl, whoever you are planning it for. I hope you have been inspired to take a trip this year or look to start planning one. It's never too late to start traveling. It can open up your eyes to new experiences or even unlock things about yourself that you never knew. I believe everyone should travel and explore more of what this world has to offer. It can give us an appreciation and love for so many things. So let's get traveling.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From travel to health and wellness to entertainment and life and happiness to sex and relationships. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast.